Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before we go ahead and get started, I want to go over some housekeeping items. First, please identify yourself when speaking. Saying your name and your organization before you speak helps everybody to follow along with the conversation. We also have a chat and Q&A functions in this webinar. Please use the chat function to respond to questions we may ask the audience or engage with other webinar attendees. If you don't want your questions seen by everyone, use the drop-down menu on the chat to directly message your intended audience. Use the Q&A function to raise a question for our panelists to discuss. We also have a live transcript. Closed captioning has been enabled for this meeting, so you can turn yours on by clicking the box that says CC in your control bar. Additionally, attendees can follow the caption link dropped in the chat to access captions. You should see an ASL interpreter at the top of your screen. We have pinned this for your use during this webinar. And finally, we are recording this webinar. So you may have already noticed and heard this for this session. This is so it can be shared on ELA's YouTube page and referenced in the future. But don't worry, any sensitive information or personal stories will be edited out before sharing the final recording. There may be links, emails, and resources shared in the chat. After the webinar, we will send out that information in an email to all participants. So don't feel like you need to hurriedly take notes, unless, of course, you want to. So with that, I will go ahead and officially, again, welcome you all, if you just joined in, to Centering Learners with Disabilities within Advancing Digital Equity for All. If you didn't already hear me introduce myself, my name is Tria Hutchings. And before we dive into today's content, I just want to share a little bit more information about ELA, the Educating All Learners Alliance, who is hosting this webinar. We're a coalition of organizations dedicated to producing and sharing resources, programs, and events like these, dedicated to supporting students with learning differences. And with that, I'll pass it over to Jessica and each of our presenters to introduce themselves.
Hi, thank you so much, Tria. My name is Jessica Chung. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a fellow at the Office of Educational Technology, where I work on our digital equity, open licensing, and digital credentials initiatives. I'm really excited to be here today with an incredible panel of advocates and learners. We'll do a round of introductions. So I'll call on each panelist. When I call on you, please come off mute and introduce yourself. I'd like to ask Diana first to introduce herself.
Thanks. I'm Diana Autain. I'm the Executive Director of the National Center for Parent Leadership, Advocacy, and Community Empowerment. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an Indigenous woman with shoulder length, slightly wavy, silver gray hair.
Thank you so much, Diana. Next, I'd like to call Rebecca to introduce herself.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Sheffield. I'm an education program specialist at the U.S. Department of Education. I also use she, her pronouns. I have fair skin and slightly longer brown hair, and it's great to be here.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Next, I'd like to call on Ava to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ava Bullis. I am 17 years old. I am from the state of New Jersey. I'm the inspiration behind the organization Ava's Voice. I have fair skin, long, wavy, light brown hair, and so excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Ava. Cynthia, could you introduce yourself next?
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cynthia Curry. I work for CAST. Specifically, I'm the principal investigator and project director for the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials for Learning, and principal investigator for the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems. I use she, her pronouns, and I have gray hair, early gray. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And Salome, would you like to introduce yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Salome Cummins. I come from the Republic of Georgia. I have white skin because I am from the Caucasus Mountains, apparently. I am 11 years old, turned 12 in 61 days. I also use she, her pronouns. And I am glad to be here too. And I just hope I don't give too bad of a insight into everything because of any lack of instruction on certain products or something like that.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure you're going to do great today.
I'll try.
So again, my name is Jessica Chung. I am an Asian American woman with my hair pulled back, and I'm wearing a white shirt and gray sweater. So thank you all so much for joining us today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Office of Educational Technology, we are part of the U.S. Department of Education, and we develop national educational technology policy and establish the vision for how technology can be used to transform teaching and learning, and how to make everywhere, all the time learning possible for early education, K-12, higher education, and adult education. So I'd like to start with an overview of the Digital Equity Education Roundtables initiative that produced the Advancing Digital Equity for All resource, which is the subject of today's webinar and panel. So in fall 2021, OET, which is the acronym for the Office of Educational Technology, we launched the Digital Equity Education Roundtables initiative to identify barriers that learner communities face in adopting reliable, high-speed internet and technology tools for learning. We also wanted to recommend strategies that leaders can leverage to navigate those barriers and amplify examples of solutions. The catalyst for this work was the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which invests $65 billion into broadband access and expanding broadband access equitably and sustainably available at scale. The bipartisan infrastructure law includes the Digital Equity Act programs, which are administered by the Department of Commerce, National Telecommunications and Information Administration. One of those programs in the Digital Equity Act funds the development and implementation of state digital equity plans. So with this background in mind, one of the central questions we asked ourselves at the Office of Educational Technology is, what is the role of the Department of Education in maximizing the impact of that $65 billion investment into broadband access, especially as state leaders are developing state digital equity plans for spending these dollars? And how do we make sure that those benefits reach learners, families, educators, and communities that are the furthest from digital opportunities? And so these are the questions that led to the development of the DEAR initiative. And through the DEAR initiative, we held a series of listening sessions with communities, organizations championing education and digital access, including families and students themselves. We then used the findings from these conversations to develop guidance for state leaders as they develop state digital equity plans. And we're also continuing to spur action and commitment among different sectors in the digital equity ecosystem. We've had strategic conversations with various key players, such as education nonprofits, state and district leaders, philanthropies, industry leaders, and think tanks and research organizations. And in developing this guidance resource, we wanted to make sure our learners were at the center, especially those furthest from digital equity and opportunity. So the organizations and communities that we worked with to develop the resource included learners of color, Native and Indigenous learners, learners from rural areas, learners from urban areas, post-secondary learners, adult learners, highly mobile learners such as migratory, refugee, or undocumented learners, learners experiencing homelessness, justice involved learners, learners with disabilities, and parents and caregivers. And so finally, at our National Digital Equity Summit, which we hosted in September, we launched the publication informed by these learner-centered listening sessions, our Advancing Digital Equity for All resource, which we are so excited to share with you and to share with the field. This resource is now available on the Office of Educational Technology website at tech.ed.gov/DEER. And you can also scan this QR code to access the resource. So one of the important findings from our scan of the literature on digital equity in education and through our listening sessions is that access is comprised of three critical elements. We call them the 3 A's of availability, affordability, and adoption. And this is the framework around which the new resource is organized. So for what we found was for equitable access to happen, we need to ensure that all three aspects of access are addressed. Availability, meaning the physical infrastructure that enables connectivity and physical access to technology tools in a particular geographic area. We must also address affordability, or families' ability to pay for the total cost of subscribing to and maintaining access to broadband and technology tools. And we must also address adoption. So the adoption refers to those human level elements that can either enable or impede access to and usage of broadband or technology tools, such as access to information, technical support, and digital skills and literacy for educators, learners, and families and caregivers. And while our federal colleagues at the Federal Communications Commission and the Department of Commerce tackle issues of broadband availability and affordability, we saw an opportunity for the Department of Education to really drive the conversation around adoption, or around those human elements. So we need to be able to help our learners connect by taking a human approach to this issue, by meeting communities where they are, and supporting them in using technology tools in a way that supports their individual goals. So the guidance concludes with 5 key steps for leaders as they are developing their digital equity plans, which were derived from these listening sessions and from the barriers and strategies that we identified. We urge leaders to develop and earn public trust through authentic engagement and collaboration with community partners. We urge them to learn from those impacted by inequitable access and provide accessible opportunities for feedback. We encourage them to co-develop clear goals and strategies with communities to craft a comprehensive digital equity plan. We encourage them to raise public awareness through inclusive communications and to provide ongoing support for low or no cost broadband programs through multilingual and multimodal means. And we urge leaders to provide digital literacy training and professional learning opportunities for educators, learners, families and caregivers, and communities. We emphasize that this work will require collaboration among leaders and communities to co-develop and implement strategies that are aligned to their unique circumstances and that address all 3 components of access: availability, affordability, and adoption. So with that, I want to first make sure, before we dive into this incredible panel, we first want to make sure that we're using the same vocabulary when we're talking about technology tools. So I'd like to pitch this first question to Cynthia from CAST. How are special education technologies and assistive technologies different from accessible technologies?
Great. Thank you so much for this question, Jessica. This is Cynthia speaking. Because in any discussion about technology and students with disabilities, it's important to be clear about the vocabulary that's used, as you stated. Because otherwise, people may draw conclusions based on assumptions about students with disabilities who are often mistakenly labeled special education students. And the reality is that disability and its impact on each learner varies widely across the student population. Majority of students with disabilities spend most or all of the school day in general education curriculum. And these learners may receive special education services or accommodations under a 504 plan to ensure their progress in the general education curriculum. So to that end, we need to bring an accessibility mindset to discussions about students with disabilities and education technology. That is, what are the barriers in the digital materials and technologies used in general education curriculum for learners who don't use a keyboard and a mouse? Or what are the barriers for students who don't decode and comprehend text in typically developing ways? So the students on our panel will inform us that learners with disabilities can be independent, fully participate, and make progress in the general education curriculum, but only if the system around them has proactively identified and removed the barriers that commonly permeate the digital materials and technologies used in schools. So I'm super excited to be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So this is Jessica from OET speaking again. Thank you again, Cynthia. Next, we want to hear from you all in the audience via the Zoom poll feature. So we're curious, in your experience, what are the biggest barriers to digital equity? The poll options include, and I'll just want to make sure that our producers are launching the poll. Unless I'm on deck to launch the poll, please let me know. But again, we want to know what, in your experience, are the biggest barriers to digital equity. The poll options include a lack of access to affordable, reliable, high-speed broadband. Number 2, a lack of access to personal devices such as laptops. Number 3, a lack of sufficient digital infrastructure. Number 4, a lack of knowledge or skill to use digital technology. Number 5, a lack of knowledge of how students with disabilities use educational technology. And number 6, other. You can feel free to specify in the chat if there's another barrier that most impacts your access, your digital access and digital equity in your area. So I'll give you all a moment to respond to that poll. And I see that our poll results are in, and it looks like there's quite several factors seem to pose some of the biggest barriers to digital equity in the experience of our attendees. The most common response is a lack of knowledge of how students with disabilities use educational technology, followed by, in close contention, are a lack of access to affordable, reliable, high-speed broadband, lack of sufficient digital infrastructure, and a lack of knowledge or skill to use digital technology. So thank you all so much for sharing a little bit about what your access looks like. What are some of the barriers to your access? I'd now like to address our amazing student panelists for this next question. Our first question for our panel, again directed at our student panelists, is how do you access and use digital instructional materials like websites and your district's learning management system? So I'll invite either Ava or Salome to respond.
Hi, this is Ava speaking. I would just like to preface for anyone who is joining us. I am 17 years old. I'm in 11th grade, and I have Usher syndrome, which is the leading cause of deafblindness. So in regards to this question, for my school district, we are provided with Chromebooks, and the Chromebooks are not necessarily very beneficial to me because the way the Chromebooks are set up are not sufficient in utilizing for accessibility purposes. So for that, I have to be very intentful when I advocate for the use of my own technology, which is very expensive. Like I use a MacBook. So when using the MacBook, I use platforms like Google Classroom and a lot of Google-based platforms, which thankfully are pretty accessible using the shortcuts of the MacBook. Other than that, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so Chromebooks too. I was able to get my own laptop computer which has been really helpful because I am completely blind and I need JAWS to be alive at school anyway. And JAWS is the job access with speech, and for now it's not super expensive, but it will be. But like, yeah, school Chromebooks, Google Classroom. I was not like instructed really in how to use Google platforms like that, so I usually use Microsoft if at all possible. Canvas is a good resource as well that middle and high students use, and uh, I also use Focus Sporty Braille Display, which helps me not need to have audio blurting out in the middle of my classes.
Great. Thank you, Ava and Salome. You kind of alluded, sorry, this is Jessica from OET speaking. Ava and Salome, you both alluded to some of the potential barriers you might have in accessing digital materials. You mentioned how your schools typically use Chromebooks or Google Classrooms, which are not, might not be designed to be accessible, or you might not have had instruction or support in how to use those technologies. Could you tell us a little bit more about some of those barriers you've experienced with accessing digital materials and technologies for learning?
And as I say, Google Classroom probably is completely accessible, though I don't have the instruction to use it on how to use it, so it's not very, like, it really depends on who's teaching you all your accessible things, because some people teach Microsoft. They have the Google is bad attitude, and Google is inaccessible attitude. But as my mom, who is also a TBI, says, some people are Google savvy. They might say Microsoft is a bad idea and it's not accessible because it's just what they learned to use, maybe, and also what they think is most accessible. And I feel like sometimes we end up learning what our TBIs think is the best, and then we have to figure out how to shape our learning community through learning environment, through advocacy, to those programs. I always use Microsoft, so I have to sometimes ask my teachers to please give it to me in Microsoft Word instead of Google Docs, for example.
Thank you, Salome. This is Jessica from OET speaking. I just want to comment that a couple folks dropped in the chat that TVI stands for Teacher of Students with Visual Impairments. So I just wanted to make that clarification. And thank you, Salome. That's a really helpful insight. I think highlights how important training and instruction around using different tools is important, as well as how it can pose challenges to have to switch between different platforms as well. Ava, I think I saw you had a response as well.
Yes, if I may add on. This is Ava speaking. So I am currently receiving lessons through my TBI with my Focus 40. And the issue is whenever I encounter a difficulty with navigating with the Focus, I'm usually the one that has to figure out myself how to proceed. And I can't really rely on the TBI because they don't have that same training. Thankfully, I received one-on-one training through my specialist, technology specialist, and that has really allowed me to, figure out and problem solve on my feet. But if the TBIs also receive that same training, it would make the lessons much smoother and we can kind of collaborate in solving issues together.
This is Jessica from OET. Thank you. That's a really great insight, how important training is, not just for learners, but also for educators as well as they support students with disabilities. Thank you so much. So next, I'd like our other panelists to respond to this next one. What challenges have you seen learners with disabilities or their families and caregivers or educators face in accessing or using digital materials and technologies for learning?
Rebecca speaking. Sorry.
Go ahead. It's okay. Go ahead, Rebecca. Go ahead.
All right, I'll just jump in with a few ideas. First, I wanted to just really underscore what both Ava and Salome just said, that helping our teachers be prepared, especially those specially trained teachers of the deaf, teachers of students with visual impairments, the specialists that work in special education. There's so much to learn. If you can imagine, they're learning maybe to teach Braille, and they're learning all these technologies, which are constantly updating. And so not only do we need to have strong personnel prep programs, which my office supports through grants and resources, but we also have to have ongoing personnel preparation and training. But even that is not enough, because these students are not just students who receive special education. They go to school in a general education environment, right? And so we need our the people who buy the software, the people who buy the textbooks at the school district who are not part of the special education department, they also need to be thinking about and understanding some of the needs of these students. And I know Cynthia can tell you even more about that in the work that they do at CAST with a couple of our centers. And then the last thing I thought I would share is in the past, I was a teacher of students with visual impairments, or TVI, in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so I had some unique insights into working with students there. And what I saw was that even, that some of our hardest to serve areas, we need to make sure that when they have plans for using technology, just like all students have barriers to that Wi-Fi and that access, that we really consider those unique circumstances, hurricanes, and being able to respond and having the students be prepared. I mean, if you imagine you're a kindergarten student and you've never had any assistive technology training before, your classmates get sent home with an iPad or something, and they can immediately start interacting and maybe doing some remote instruction. But for our kids, there's a lot to learn for students who need to learn some of these access technologies. So building those plans in place, even in some of our hardest to serve and most remote places, is something that I'm passionate about, and I hope that we can continue to do as the department.
Hi, this is Diana Autain from National Place, and our perspective is really from the perspective of parents of students. And I think, first of all, it's important to remember that parents themselves may have disabilities, and parents are important partners with teachers in making sure that their children are able to access learning. And so all of the different issues and barriers that were addressed by our student panelists are also barriers for parents of students who themselves, that the parents themselves have disabilities. I think throughout the pandemic, we have heard from our members who are family to family health information centers and parent centers and parent to parent programs and others, that the families that they are serving face all three of those barriers: availability, affordability, and adoption. And, in terms of availability, it's everything from having reliable high-speed broadband connections. And people would think, for example, that in a state like Pennsylvania, that everybody would have access to reliable high-speed broadband connections. But there are huge areas of states like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, many states that people would not think would have this problem, where people have this problem, where they're just basically dead space and you don't have access to those broadband connections. And I think another thing that is important to note is the personal device issue. We heard from many, many parents throughout the pandemic that they might have had a cell phone that was a smartphone where they could access things from the internet, but they only had one, and they didn't have unlimited access. They had certain, they paid as they go. They only had a few minutes, and they couldn't spend all that time in getting their children to be able to access instruction, or for them to be able to interact with teachers and help support that instruction. And even those families that have a computer, if you have two children, well, then you're in a bad situation because you only have a computer that's available for one child. And of course, issues of affordability are really critical for families of students with disabilities. We know that children with disabilities are more likely to live in low-income families, single-parent families, families that are not likely to have reliable access either to broadband or to the things like smartphones or computers that are needed for access. And then there's also a huge barrier in terms of lack of trust, particularly between the most underserved families and government entities or others that are trying to engage in efforts to help expand access to digital programs and even things like cell phones and computers. And so it's really important that entities that are trying to expand access and really make it digital technology really accessible and equitable, to partner with community-based organizations that already have trust in underserved communities, like community parent resource centers or parent training information centers, immigrant serving organizations, et cetera. And the last point that I want to make, even though I could talk about this just by myself for a whole hour, is the issue of language access. Even when you have all of those other things, broadband, a laptop, and you can afford it, et cetera, the issue of language access to really be able to understand how to get the information that you need, and also to get the support that you need in order to be able to use the technology, especially for those parents that are not part of the that are not kind of first adopters. They're people they're really not digital natives. And so I think the language access issue really cannot be emphasized enough.
Jessica, this is Cynthia. I'll just jump in with something really quick that hasn't been touched on, and that's the lack of a coordinated system, whether it be in a district or at the state level, and really thinking systemically about the ways that digital materials and technologies reach students. Oftentimes, we believe that special education can play the role of accommodating students with disabilities, but in many cases, decisions that are made by the system can't be retrofitted, in which case we have students who have a delay in getting access to the materials and technologies. In some cases, they are never able to access the same curriculum. That there has to be, it's not uncommon for students across wide-ranging disabilities really to be given a separate curriculum or just not participate because people don't know what the solutions are, and because there's not a coordinated system around ensuring that there are roles and responsibilities, whether it's from the procurement beginning of selecting materials and technologies, whether it's knowing where to get accessible formats for students with reading disabilities or blindness or low vision or physical disabilities, or whether it's teachers who are creating their own content and ensuring that they know how to make that content accessible for students who use assistive technology. So it really does require a system. It can't be on one department or one role and responsibility. Thank you.
This is Jessica from OET. Thank you all so much for those insights. I think they really draw out some of those barriers across all three of those components of access: affordability, availability, adoption as well, especially the need for training, the need for collaboration. I saw in the chat, one of our audience members noted, this really highlights the importance of collaboration across grade level teams and related service providers. I think your comments would also add across community-based organizations with families and caregivers. There needs to be that, I think as Cynthia noted, that coordinated effort to serve students, to serve all students, and really, really mean all. So thank you all so much for those insights. Next, we have another poll. We would love to hear from you all again in the audience. This time we would like to hear how, we would like to get a sense of how familiar you are with the following initiatives and using them to improve digital equity. So you should see the poll launching. The options include 1, the Emergency Connectivity Fund, 2, the Affordable Connectivity Program, 3, the White House Get Internet Initiative, 4, the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems, and 5, other, which you are welcome to specify in the chat. So again, we are interested in how familiar you are with these initiatives and using them to advance digital equity. And I see some folks commenting in the chat that today, this is the first time they're hearing about some of these initiatives, which I think signals to us at the federal government that we need to do a better job of getting this information out, getting it out in ways that are language accessible, that are accessible to users with disabilities. Thank you all so much for your responses. It looks like a pretty even split among all of these different programs, which ones you all were familiar with, but still for each of them, only about a third of folks were familiar, or a third of respondents were familiar with these different programs. So thank you again for sharing your insights with us. This next question I would like to direct to our student panelists again. What is an example of a success you have had with accessing digital materials and technologies for learning?
This is Ava speaking. So in regards to an example of a success I've had, so over the years, me and my mom have gone into different school districts where I've attended, and we would take that opportunity to educate the staff about my diagnosis. For one reason, this made it much easier as I was navigating around the building. They would understand who I was and, to keep an eye out. And also, secondly, for my specific class teachers, they would kind of get an idea of my diagnosis, and because majority of them never had a student like me before. So this kind of gives them a glimpse into how to kind of work with me. I'm very open to having communication because that should always be the center when having conversations like these. So thankfully, all these years, I've had many teachers who have been more than accommodating in helping me succeed in the classroom. And in terms of accessing technology, thankfully, although it's very expensive, my family has been able to provide me with the technology I need. But the thing is, I have to be I have to make it crucial to the district for them to know that I need this in order to be successful in the classroom, and that I can't use the stuff they provide. So if the school district, instead of generalizing what accessibility is, if they kind of focus more on what an individual's exact needs are and kind of accommodate that way, I could be even more successful in the classroom.
This is Jessica from OET. Thank you so much for that insight. And I think what I'm drawing from that is how important it is for educators and school-based personnel and district personnel to work with students and to learn from students, especially students with disabilities, about their actual needs and not make assumptions and not make generalizations. That it's so important to co-develop a plan to ensure access. So thank you for that. Salome, would you like to share an example?
Yeah, so my district at the secondary level where I am in 6th grade, they use Canvas, which is a learning platform for the digital assignments, and then they use Infinite Campus. I don't know if it's called Infinite Campus, Campus Portal, whatever. But they use Infinite Campus for grades that are like everything that we always do in the classroom. And both of those are very accessible, and except for the Google Docs. Those I don't really know how to use, so because of a lack of instruction. But like the websites themselves are very good. Now in Canvas especially, teachers need to get along with the accessibility train in order for things to stay accessible. Because if they put, for example, a PDF with an image, no alt text, I'm like, okay, an image. What is in this image? Asks the question. I don't know. So I feel like images in general and graphics, they're just not as easy to deal with digitally, wherever you are. If you're in Google, Microsoft, it doesn't matter. Images and graphics are hard to deal with.
If I may add, this is Ava speaking. Stella made some really great points. I also want to add that as students, we're also at the mercy of whatever platform the school district uses. And majority of the time, that's very inaccessible. And not only that, whatever platform the school district uses, the teachers don't really understand how accessibility interfaces with that platform. So I think what needs to be made, the main focus of conversation is for teachers to understand not only how the platform works regularly, but how it works with accessibility across the board.
Great points, Salome and Ava. Thank you so much for that. I would like to direct the next question to our other panelists. What information, technical support, training, or other supports and resources do you think would be helpful for learners with disabilities or their families and caregivers, their educators, to access and use digital materials and technologies for learning?
This is Cynthia Curry from CAST, and I will offer up 2 technical assistance centers that we operate at CAST, both funded by the Office of Special Education Programs at the Department of Education. One being CITES, the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems, and I'm delighted that a lot of people are learning about CITES today. I'll drop the links in the chat after I describe them. But CITES is a center that's working with school districts to develop a framework that supports the districts in better coordinating across assistive technology and instructional technology. So really breaking down what are commonly called silos within school districts, but not only that, really digging into the infrastructure of the district to make sure that what is being selected, what's being built is plugged into considerations of students with disabilities who use assistive technology, and procuring and supporting the creation of accessible materials for students with disabilities. So CITES, we're developing a framework that's actually based on the 2017 National Education Technology Plan, and building out practices, evidence-based practices in partnership with a cohort of districts that can then be scaled up and adopted by other districts. Has family engagement practices, infrastructure, leadership, teaching, learning, and assessment. And then the Center on Accessible Educational Materials for Learning, we're working with states to build coordinated systems primarily around, and specifically the provision of accessible educational materials and accessible technologies. So we're working with a cohort of 7 states to build up practices and models of how states and partnering school districts can coordinate and make sure that regardless of the pathway of a material or technology is reaching students, that consideration of accessibility is part of that pipeline. And I just want to really underscore Ava's comment about how we can't think about accessibility as a general principle, that accessibility really is determined by the individual. So sometimes the question is asked commonly, is this accessible? Would you give us an example of an accessible learning management system? But it really is individualized and determined by the student, and also needs to be ease of use. So for example, if there is a paper handout, oftentimes students are provided with an OCR or an optical character recognition app. So the student who may have a reading disability can convert that static text into digital text in real time. At the AIM Center, at CAST, and at sites, we consider that not necessarily accessible because it's not the same ease of use as other students who don't have disabilities having access at the same time as everyone else. So really thinking deeply about what accessible means and really thinking about it from the individual's standpoint and bringing students with disabilities and their families into these discussions. Thank you.
Well, and this is Diana Ochan from National Place. And I think I alluded to this in my earlier comment about the barriers, and really partnering with organizations that are already working with families, and in particular families of children with disabilities, but underserved families, even if they're not explicitly focused on families who have children with disabilities, is really important, because those are the organizations that are already trusted by families, who are from the most underserved communities, have language access issues, may have disabilities themselves. Because those organizations are staffed by people from the constituency, they have direct experience with trying to learn how to use digital technology, and they often have connections to other types of information and support that individual families don't have access to on their own. So I think partnering with parent centers, centers and other community-based organizations is really critical to help families and caregivers to be able to access digital technology and also support their children's use of it in school.
Thanks, Diana. This is Rebecca. I'll build on that and talk a little bit about how I see it's important, and definitely at OSEP we're working to talk about what these successes look like across the lifespan, really, right? So our babies grow up to be third graders, grow up to be high school graduates, grow up to be college students. So we need to start talking and thinking about access and accessibility as early as possible. So in our projects that focus on early childhood, we are working with Health and Human Services and other federal agencies to make sure that that families are really supported, and whether, no matter what language is spoken at home, no matter what background, that they start to develop that relationship and know about resources, right, so that they can get access to the internet, that we have beginnings of accessible technology available in homes and early childhood centers, so that our kids have those experiences when they're ready for kindergarten. And then as the students get older, just as their peers are starting to take things home, we need to make sure that some of these technologies can be taken home, even if they're very expensive technologies. If that's a student's pencil, it's their Braille writer, they need to take it home, right? And so making sure that districts are supported to do that. And then as our students, get older, we've got Salome and Ava are both secondary students. It won't be long before they're going to be graduating high school, heading to college. And at that point, there won't be a TVI going to college with them. So they need to be, and they already are clearly strong advocates for themselves, but being able to talk about their technologies, being able to describe the accommodations they need, and learning what things they can do for themselves. So as a TVI, I always told my students, I'm trying to teach myself out of a job. This is no longer my responsibility. It's got to become the student's responsibility, so that as we move out of the special education system, we partner up with our sister, the Rehabilitation Services Organization, and the resources available there, that this continuum shifts into the students, having the maximum independence and responsibility for making choices about their access. So I think all of, that's sort of a picture that drives what we see as successful solutions and supports for students.
This is Jessica from OET. Thank you all so much for those insights. I think it really underscores how important it is to provide comprehensive support that supports the whole student, the whole child, from having home access to technology to making sure they have a coordinated system of supports in school, to partnering with organizations in the community, and that support system should support learners from cradle to career and beyond. And I think Cynthia's comments also highlight how important it is to not just think about accessibility, but also usability. That access, the goal isn't necessarily access, it's making sure that students are able to use these tools and to use them to meet their goals. So I appreciate your insights on this topic. My last prepared question, and while I'm asking this question and while our panelists are responding, please feel free to add your own questions in the Q&A box. We would love to hear from you all as well. But my last prepared question for our panelists is, what do you want leaders to know about advancing digital equity for learners with disabilities? And I'll start with our student panelists, Ava and Salome, if either of you would like to chime in on this question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just think that it has to be everybody working together in order for everything to be accessible. So, as I mentioned earlier, some of it isn't your anybody as the leader's fault. Some of it is just, I didn't have proper instruction to learn how to use this. And so it's not only the leaders picking the websites, it's also the TBIs knowing how to use them and teaching the kids how to use them, and the teacher, the general education teacher, knowing how to use them and using them in an accessible format. So just, don't think it's a bunch of pressure. It's a very, very complicated matter that isn't wholly on one person. And if something is not right in the chain, even if it isn't the leaders, it's hard to access for whatever reason.
This is Ava speaking. I 100% agree with Salome. Teamwork is so imperative for all of us to be successful. I also just want to add that, having access to the technology and the accessibility that comes with it has allowed me to compete on a level playing field with my peers in the classroom. And I'm very highly academic. I take honors and AP classes, and I want to, go to a good college and, continue to a very good career. So having this technology, I'm able to perform to my fullest potential. And, I don't have to have any concerns about accessing content during class. I can kind of keep on pace what's happening in the classroom and still learn the general knowledge of what is going on. And it's really about accommodations, not modifications. That's the biggest thing I always like to say. Also, I just want to say that we are more than capable of succeeding. It's just a matter of accessing technology, accessing material, and the knowledge of how to use it. And so I think that's why it's so important that this conversation doesn't end. Technology is evolving every day, and we all have some way to input and how to collaborate together to make sure this all succeeds. That's the biggest thing. We all want to succeed. And, it's we're here to help you too. You know, we're still learning as well, and you know, feel free to ask questions about how we have to go through the barriers ourselves sometimes. So we've kind of self-educated ourselves to figure out issues. And I feel like that's really helpful because we are the ones living with the disability every single day, and we can all learn something from each other.
Ava, this is Diana O'Tan from National Place. And I just want to follow up on that, which is leaders need to know that they need to be consulting very deeply with learners with disabilities, their families, and the professionals who serve them in order to figure this out. Because the lived experience that you and Salome have as learners with disabilities is critical. The experiences and the barriers that parents face is critical, and the barriers that and the needs of the professionals that are trying to make sure that you're able to learn and do that using appropriate technology are also critical. So all of those populations need to be coming together and sharing their experiences and recommendations with leaders as they are trying to develop plans and implement plans and evaluate the effectiveness of plans to ensure that we have digital equity.
This is Cynthia. I will just add something very basic that leaders need to know that this is the law. That is often comes as a surprise to administrators at all levels that this is that this is covered under civil rights. Whether it's the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Section 508. There's just so many different ways that this is the law. We don't like to jump right to a compliance mindset. We like to stay in an accessibility mindset. But I think that is something that leaders really need to know and to better understand that this is the law, as much as student data privacy and other factors that really get a lot of attention from leaders.
And everything that's been said is perfect. And I'll add a strategy that doesn't work is trying to fix something and make it accessible after you've already bought it. And after you've already built the ship and then trying to make it accessible. It works so much better if you think about these things from the very beginning in everything that you do. And a strategy that I like to recommend for making that happen is think about accessibility and people with disabilities as part of your workforce. There's no better way to learn about accessibility than by working with people with disabilities. And so as we're all thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workforces, getting to work with someone who has mastered these assistive technology skills, getting to work alongside people who have these experiences is just the greatest learning experience and such a such a bonus to your team. So if you're building a team, please think of including some of these brilliant minds and considering how our workforce can be more representative and inclusive as well.
This is Jessica from OET speaking. Thank you all so much for those insights. I think they are really, really important to take note of, from how important it is to design and develop policies and tools with accessibility in mind from the ground up, how important it is to draw upon the knowledge and expertise of individuals with disabilities, and to remember that this is the law. Those insights are really, really powerful. And I'm very, very grateful for the time that I've had with you all this afternoon. And I want to thank our participants for their attention. And I especially want to thank our panelists for their time and their insights. And extra kudos to our student panelists who did an amazing job today. Thank you all so much for your time this afternoon. And I hope you all have an amazing afternoon. Thank you all so much.